Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Start the Week with Wisdom. I'm Bridget Burns with the University Innovation Alliance.
And I'm Doug Lederman, editor and co-founder of Inside Higher Ed.
Each week, Doug and I team up to have a conversation with a sitting college president or chancellor to try and understand what we've learned from this moment, what their leadership can do to help inspire us, and to just gain some perspective to start the week on an optimistic note. So that's why we call it Start the Week with Wisdom.
This week, we're joined by President L. Richardson, who's the 14th president of Colorado College, which started late last summer. Most recently, she was the dean and chancellor's professor of law at the University of California, Irvine School of Law. Welcome, President Richardson.
Thank you so much. Still a professor too.
Right.
We are delighted to have you with us today. And I can't help but point out to folks at home that she started in the midst of COVID. And so I wanted to just tee up what it's been like for you as a leader to kind of step into your rhythm as a leader with new people and build new relationships in a remote world. So perhaps you can give us a little kind of your trajectory story to set the tone.
Sure. And first, I just want to thank you both. Thank you so much for having me on this program. It's such an honor to be here with you. So starting in COVID, what does that mean for a new leader? I think what it meant for me was to hone the skills of communication and just being present. I think so often we can take being in a room together in person as a way of shorthand almost, right? In moving maybe too quickly to getting to know people, to building relationships, to building trust. And yet now that we're on Zoom, or had been when I started, we have to be so deliberate about showing up, about getting to know people, about answering questions and having people ask questions of me. So I think in the end, in terms of communication, transparency, relationship building, it might have been a benefit in ways that I never would have predicted.
Curious what are the ways in which we maybe have taken for granted how we communicate with each other and how, because I guess I feel like find myself relearning or having to relearn how to actually be with people again. And so I'm curious about where you see the, I don't know, what you felt like you had to how it was, why you had to be more purposeful about how you were together, and where the problems if you don't.
Yeah, what a great question. And the way I had to be purposeful was to be less spontaneous sometimes, I think, right? So often if I'm appearing in person, I feel very comfortable being in person with a group of people and being spontaneous about what it is that I want to communicate and how I want to engage and get people that I'm talking to engage. It's way easier, I feel like, to do that in person. So now that we're on Zoom and I might have a group of 40 people in small boxes across the screen, and trying to remember to pay attention to see who is communicating and who isn't. Am I able to engage everyone who's on that call? Being deliberate in ensuring that those who might not feel comfortable speaking in public, that I give them other opportunities, whether through chat or other ways of being able to communicate. And in some ways, Zoom and the chat function has made it easier for people to communicate where they might not have if they had been live in person with a group of people. And so what I love about Zoom and this online format sometimes is it provides a variety of different ways for people to engage both with each other and with me.
So I am curious about, as a dean of a law school previously. So there's often a characterization that, as people move up towards the presidency, that of the positions that you hold prior, chair, sometimes dean, provost, that dean is actually the most similar to the presidency because you have fundraising, you have kind of some degree of autonomy, et cetera. But I'm curious about what has been a surprising new skill you've had to develop that the deanship perhaps maybe wasn't giving you that same opportunity before.
Wow, that is a great question, Bridget, because you're right. There are so many ways in which the two are identical. And I learned a lot of what the things that are identical about the two. So what is different? I think what is primarily different for me is when I was the dean, there was another chancellor. Right? Mm-hmm. When I was the dean, there was a president. When I was a dean, I could say, you know what, look over there. And then, so every once in a while, I remember, oh, wait, I'm that person, right? I am. And I think the enormity of that, it can be really humbling. Just driving around the campus when we first got here, my husband and I, right? And it's such a beautiful place. But every once in a while, the enormity of the fact that I'm the president would hit me. And I would say that's the biggest difference.
That's interesting. And who do you as president, there's obviously not anybody to pass things up to exactly. I mean, you obviously have board support and board communications, but who do you lean on? Who do you, how do you check? Who's your gut check? How do you gut check things?
Right.
Is that different from what you've done before, or is it pretty similar?
I would say it's pretty similar in that the team, I gut check things with the other senior leaders. I gut check things with student leaders. So all of it depends on what the issue might be with faculty leaders. And then obviously, I think with the other leaders across the country who are engaging in and answering and dealing with the same sorts of opportunities and challenges. So it's a wide group of people, and my own style of leadership is to always seek a lot of input, knowing that I'm the primary decision maker sometimes, right, with certain issues, and making it clear what those issues are when I know that I'm the final decision maker. But what I like so much is to get a diverse group of views from a variety of different people who may hold different thoughts on a particular matter, because I think that's how we get the best decisions.
That's great.
And then I'm happy to admit mistakes. So happy to do something and say, oops, right? Let's try something else. Happy to do that.
That's healthy. So I'm curious about what has been the most surprising thing about your career. You've had just a really, as a scholar, and also as having someone who's had significant public impact, and then also really an impact in the academy. I'm just super curious about, from you and your own perspective, like what element has been the most surprising?
That I'm sitting here right now as president of Colorado College. I would say that's the most surprising, and maybe it shouldn't be surprising, because nothing in my entire career has been planned since law school and a public interest fellowship I had. After that, everything that I've done were not things I would have imagined that I would be doing. And so maybe I shouldn't be surprised, but I've just been very fortunate at having opportunities appear, and then just being willing to say yes to those opportunities and to see where it brings me, as long as those opportunities really fit my own values and beliefs.
So that's really interesting, because I'm constantly, especially at my more advanced age, getting, lots of people coming to me, kids and their friends, but lots of people about sort of career arcs. And so I spend a lot of time thinking about that. And I'm interested to hear you. I describe myself as an accidental entrepreneur. I didn't set out to create a business like inside higher ed or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people are, I think the accidental or I don't know, maybe not everybody may like that word, but the way you describe sort of seeing what emerges may make some people uncomfortable, but and I think there are a lot of people who sort of like to plot things out and feel like they have a direction. But what are the things you have used to guide the next thing, to help you figure out the next thing? And how do you think about that intentionality versus seeing what emerges?
Oh, that's a great question too, right? Because I don't want it to sound like, and I like your term, accidental, and I also don't want it to sound haphazard, right? Right. So it's how do those? So your question really gets to how do those two things intertwine?
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think for me, I have just always been guided by my values and my belief, right? And I've been so lucky to be able to do that throughout my career since law school. And so that has been what has always guided me. So when it comes to civil rights, when it comes to thinking about race and gender and bias and all, these are things that have always fascinated me. And so I just go all in on what it is that are important, that is important to me. And then as I've been able to do that, different opportunities just have come up without me having to search for them, right? And they've just come up and they feel right. And that's what happened with Colorado College. I didn't want to leave the law school I was at. I loved it there, everything about it. And then Colorado College somehow came into my sphere. And the more I learned about them, it just felt right. There was a match with what I wanted to do in my career, what my values and beliefs were, with what Colorado College was doing and what they want to do. So I think for me, it's always been that intertwining of values and opportunity.
Well, I wanted to give folks a chance to hear a bit more about your perspective. So I want to shift to broadly higher ed and your thoughts. So I guess I would pose this, your choice of which way to answer. If you could wave a magic wand and change something about higher ed, what would you change? Or what do you think higher ed should be doing that we're not?
So I think it's probably a combination of both of those questions. And I'm not sure it's what have we not been doing as opposed to the emphasis. So I think higher ed, at least in the recent past, has been about access, right? Access and then removing barriers to success once we have provided access. So it's both, right? It's bringing people in and then creating an environment where they can be successful. And for me, that is where the emphasis has to be. And it is challenging, right? Especially in today's world where the value proposition of a liberal arts education is being questioned, where the cost of higher ed is so high. And at places like Colorado College, right? And it is something that is top of mind for me. How can we increase access and then remove the barriers? And if I could wave a magic wand right now, what would I do? Free tuition for all of our students. Like that would be it, right? Free tuition. And then the second would be how on our campus, because even with free tuition, it doesn't mean that on our campuses, everyone is set up for the same success. That's not true. And I think that's the difficult part. It's like getting people in, maybe we can figure out how to do better at that. But the challenge is, once we have people here, how do we encourage those courageous conversations? How do we encourage resilience and grit and being comfortable with failure? And we always talk about that, but I don't know that we model that ourselves either, right? We say we have to do this for the students, but do we do it? Right? I think we have to think more carefully about those things. So those are just some of the challenges I think we face.
Bridget and I were on a panel at South by Southwest EDU last week, and there was a lot of conversation about sort of what I'd characterize as institutional vulnerability and willingness to acknowledge imperfection and, if not fail, at least pivot fast when things aren't going perfectly, and sort of the often disinclination of colleges and college leaders to do that. Um, how do you think about acknowledging suboptimal outcomes and addressing them, and how do you think about your own, how do you think about especially sort of driving that down the culture?
Yeah, I think about that a lot. And one of the things that I have done since I've gotten here, day one really, is talk about that. Talk about my comfort with failure. And then being open when things don't go right. When I make a decision and I realize it could be a small decision, right? And I realize that I don't like that decision, right? It didn't come out the way I wanted to, and being very transparent and open about it, and then changing my decision. And I talk about this a lot because I think it's so important and so easy for all of us to say it, right? It's so easy to say those things, really hard to do it. And so even if I'm talking to senior leaders, sometimes I'll say, I actually haven't heard any one of you talk to me about a mistake that you've made and what you've learned from it. Because I just want to model that. And I can keep talking about it, but success to me looks like other people also trusting enough to be able to be that vulnerable. That to me is a constant struggle, and it's on my mind every day, because otherwise we become too scared, right, to take any chances, and then change won't happen. And so I'm an adrenaline junkie too. I'll just out that, right? And so I'm willing to just jump off the cliff sometimes. I really am. And so I need people around me who will pull me back sometimes. That's what I need.
That's great. So I'm curious about you as a leader, how you kind of help your team keep their eye on the ball versus being caught up in the constant stream of hard things in the world that we are hearing and seeing about, and also hard things we see in our classrooms with our students. And so is there any advice or words of wisdom that you provide to your team to help them manage balancing the real challenge of being a human being right now with advancing on the agenda that we need to all move on?
I think, yeah. So I think that's just really hard to do, especially right now. And the only way that I know to do it, and I always talking to other people about it, is first to really acknowledge it, right? To give the space to acknowledge just how hard and exhausted we all are. Because to pretend, sometimes I imagine that I should pretend that I am optimistic all the time, that everything's great, that I'm not suffering at all, and let's go do that, right? Like I could do that, and but I don't think. First, it's not honest. It's not how I'm feeling, and secondly, then I think people don't really believe that you understand what the challenges are, and so for me, it's creating a space where we can actually put on the table and examine all the things that are so hard for all of us, and then to remember all the reasons why we can still feel optimistic. And for that is one, just let's look at our own past and our own history at Colorado College. It hasn't always been roses. And look at where we are now. Look at what we have accomplished, right? Even with challenge. And then the second piece is when people are constantly coming to me and other leaders about all of the challenges and obstacles we face today, what I always say, because I really believe it, is this is what gives me optimism. Because if you had checked out, if you weren't engaged, then I wouldn't feel as optimistic as I am. But the fact that you are willing in this difficult time to take time out of your life to come to talk to me about what some of our obstacles are and challenges are tells me that you still believe that we have a wonderful future, because otherwise you would have checked out. It's like a relationship, right? Like when that relationship's over, I have checked out. I don't even care anymore. And the fact that we haven't checked out is where my optimism comes from. So that's the way I think about it.
That's great. So I think we want to move to our last two questions, which are, I'm curious about the best advice that you've received that has served you in your career. And then secondly, the advice that you find yourself most consistently giving to younger leaders?
Whew. Okay, the best advice. I wish I could choose one, but I'm just going to choose two, maybe. Right. So one is, and this came from Brene Brown, Dare to Lead, and her YouTube, right? About being in the arena and taking the armor off and knowing that you are in the arena fighting the good fight, trying to move things forward, and to not be so worried about armoring yourself against any of the critiques or other things that might be difficult, right? True leadership to me is to be vulnerable, to show what that looks like, and to remove the armor, even if it's hard, and to understand that not everyone is going to like you, and that is okay. And to be just remembering that when I want to put that armor on and show up in a particular way, I just take it off. So that is what I would say. I think I'll leave it at that. No, the second one is self-reflection, because I think the two are connected. So we are so often, it's really easy to critique others, to be angry with others, to say, you're not doing this or you're not doing that. But remember, right? Like, self-leadership is far more important than all of that. And so when you have this temptation to point the finger at others for all the things that they're not doing right, remember to actually ask yourself that question, and whether you are leading yourself in the way that you are asking others to lead.
Well, I think that's the perfect end note for today. Thank you so much, President Richardson, for the words of wisdom and inspiration. We are honored to have you here with us. Doug, as always, thank you so much for being my co-host. And for those of you at home, we hope this has given you a positive perspective to kick off the week. Please join us next week when we will have Undersecretary James Quall joining us next Monday at the same time. So thanks again, everyone.
Thank you.